Hello and welcome to the Celtic Way morning briefing. It's now officially the winter break, but we've still got the last match to break down. So joining me to do that today is Alison McConnell. How's it going, Alison?
Very well, thank you. Merry Christmas, Sean.
Merry Christmas. There's a lot to discuss actually about that. What might seem a routine Celtic 3-1 win against St Johnstone, but I suppose we'll take it in chronological order. So did you fear another slip up when that starting 11 came out? I mean, Vasilis Barkas back in goal, a midfield axis of James McCarthy and Near Bitton starting together.
I think the way that things had happened overnight, sort of Christmas night, and then sort of early in the morning yesterday, when you were hearing all sorts of suggestions about who was out and how many were out, and I think at one point there had been a suggestion that all goalkeepers had been affected by the COVID outbreak. So I think when the team actually came out, I think it was probably stronger than what I had anticipated. Obviously, the loss of Callum McGregor and a few others, but I think the fact that Kyogo had started and Abada had started, I think it looked like as strong a team as it could have been under the circumstances. I think in total there must be 13 or 14 players out, maybe. So I think when you looked at the team, I thought it was maybe stronger than what you might have anticipated. And then I think when the early goal comes, you do feel that that's so important for this Celtic team. I think that when they've broken a team down and they have that lead, there's more space to utilise and manipulate. I think sometimes when that first goal doesn't come, it risks getting quite stayed the way the St Mirren game was on Wednesday night. So I think the only real wobble was when it came back to 2-1, and you're thinking it felt a bit jittery for a spell, and then I think when the third goal comes, it's game over. But I think at 2-1 there was definitely a wee 5-10 minute spell when you might have been thinking, can they hang on here, and are they going to be made to pay again for all the missed chances? Because I think when you look at the first half, you're expecting that they go in there maybe 3-4 up and the game's out of sight, but 2-1 is a really difficult scoreline.
I'd agree. I think they played well, considering there was almost a shape change and all the personnel issues as well. And obviously the bench was basically Celtic B players, a lot of them, and obviously Volleyball and Goalie even made a return on the bench and stuff. It was not good reading in terms of if something needed to be done off the bench, which I suppose you could argue it applies to a lot of the games this season in terms of attacking, game changing options. But you mentioned one that Kyogo started, which I was not necessarily surprised about because he missed out against St Mirren, obviously. But Ange Postecoglou said afterwards that he knew again that he wasn't 100% ready, but he wanted to play. And basically what I would ask you is, even with the benefit of a winter break coming directly after it, was that another unnecessary risk? Or is it one that there was almost little alternative to, given the volume of the other absentees?
I'm going to go with the latter. I think it was necessary. I think especially on the back of Wednesday night, when you're thinking there is no scope here to drop points. Realistically, Celtic couldn't afford to come away from McDermott Park with anything other than 3 points yesterday. So I think if he's presenting himself and saying he wants to play, and I'm sure it goes deeper than a conversation like that, I'm sure there's consultations with sports scientists and the medical team. And it's probably a calculated risk. What I would say is the fact that he went off would suggest that maybe if he's felt anything at all, it's a case of get off in case you aggravate something, and then it does become a 6 to 8 week problem. So if you feel any kind of twinge or any doubt at all, then you come off. And I think sometimes it maybe just gives the team a lift. I think we've spoken about this before. I think he's quite a talismanic figure. I think Celtic seem like a different team with him in it, just because of his movement and his energy and obvious ability. But I think in an ideal world he wouldn't have started. But I think just given the scope of injuries, I think and on the back of the draw and drop points midweek, I think there was just a fear that this is an all or nothing game really, because even dropping 2 points yesterday would have become very, very difficult for Celtic going into the break.
He played his role before he went off. He was only on for 15 minutes or something, but he did play a part in that opening goal, closing down as you would expect. James McCarthy wins it, or at least partially wins it. Kyogo closes down Juranovic, who I thought actually you could make a case that Juranovic had his best game for Celtic yesterday.
Yeah,
He put the ball in early, right? I realise that it wasn't a direct assist, if you want to put it that way, because Abada, the keeper saved Abada's shot, but I still thought the whole combination leading up to the goal was effective, if you want to put it that way, and that Kyogo played his role in that before going off. As I say, Abada, mentioned Abada there, he scored twice, but in a way, Kyogo going off gave him the chance to kind of maybe play further forward a wee bit. I realise he was up there already anyway, given the change in shape, but it's something. I think it basically overall, I think it was another good stint up front for him, and I think it's a confidence boosting one. I think when I first mentioned I fancied him being able to do a job there during Kyogo's first injury absence away back in the start of September, the fact that Ange didn't use him there at all in that spell made me think that he probably wouldn't. But that's changed, and I for one, I'm delighted to see Abada find some semblance of form again after a prolonged kind of dip that I think most people would agree with. And I think that was a good indication that he still can have a role, whether it's out wide or whether it's through the middle. What was your thoughts on his performance?
Yeah, I'd agree. I think you have to remember he's a 19-year-old boy who's come from a completely different culture to come into a new club in a new country. And I know that you'll have near Bitton there that might help show him the ropes in some way. But I think at that age, I think you've got to be prepared for a level of inconsistency at times. I think wide players too are fairly notorious for dips in form. But I think overall, you would have to say it's been an impressive start for him. I would take your point that he started on fire and then went off the boil a bit. But I think the goals will do him the world of good. I think he could and should have had a hat-trick yesterday. I think given the chances he had. But I thought it was a much more effective performance from him in that role than it was against St Mirren. I thought his movement was much better. I thought he looked livelier, sharper. I thought he'd taken on board things that might have been pointed out to him in the aftermath of that game, the kind of runs that he could have been making. I think he'd clearly taken something on board from that game, because I thought it was a much more penetrative performance in terms of what he offered, and he got his reward with the goals. But yeah, you would have to say it gives Celtic another option when it may be needed. You would hope now that when they come back from the break, that they are strengthened not just by the return of players. And when you consider that his hand really has been tied with the front three all out, to only have dropped 2 points at St Mirren, I think is probably not a bad return when you consider the scope of the injuries and the fact that there has been a cluster of injuries all in the same area, with them from middle to front, and an onus on the way that the manager plays is to rely on these players to get the ball moving. So I think the manner in which Celtic have been able to keep going when they've been so seriously hindered, I think probably augurs well for them.
A couple of comments here. Feed the Bear, agreeing with you about the injuries. We've talked about injuries all season. There's not been a prolonged, even if there has been any spell under Ange Postecoglou so far where the majority of the players have been fit. I genuinely don't think there has been. But Feed the Bear here obviously saying it's they done well yesterday, but they need to strengthen, which we've been saying all season basically. You've got Will McMillan here, Abada excellent through the middle. Agreeing with you, could have a 3. Again, I agree. I think the fact that he can effectively cover another position, it just strengthens what you can do with the players available. If there are other players out, even if there's not, if you need someone to come off the bench, play up front, if Kyogo's tiring or whatever, it gives you an option there, which I think is key, especially getting into the latter half of the season. We've had plenty of Merry Christmas comments, but I'm going to put up where was it? David Bradley's comment, because it leads me on to my next point. David Bradley says Rogic is going to be massive. Hope he stays injury free. I think everybody would agree with that. That leads me on to my next question, Alison, which was basically Rogic seemed back to his best yesterday on a frankly ridiculous pitch, but it did not affect him. He was just it's one of those displays where the technical footballer rises above the conditions that he's put in. I'd say you mentioned there about the last few weeks, essentially December, but I think Tom Rogic, of all the players in December, has come to the fore. St Mirren game aside, obviously, but I don't think anybody came out of that game looking good. So Rogic in December has been pivotal. I think, basically, I want to ask you how much of that, not just December, but the fact that he's actually having a good season again, how much of that do you think is down to his familiarity with Ange and that giving him a new lease of life under a manager that he already knew?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. It's a very obvious point, obviously, because he would have worked together with Australia. But I think at the minute, I think Tom Rogic looks like a real contender for one of the players of the season just now. I think obviously Kyogo might hog those kind of awards and headlines, but I think Tom Rogic has probably been the most consistent so far than he has for probably at any point in his Celtic career. I think he'd one particularly really good, strong season under Brendan Rodgers, but I think this season it's been sustained. I think there have been games where he's been the real cog in the middle of the field that makes things work for Celtic, and I'm thinking of that game at Easter Road, the game where he actually got injured back in October, I think, where he was unplayable for a point. I thought you saw yesterday he was hugely instrumental. I think when it comes to his assists and his goals over the last few weeks, I would agree with you. I think he's really taken on an element of responsibility given the players that have been out. I think his form has been excellent in the opening half of the season. I think if he can continue it after the break, then it bodes well for Celtic. I think one of the real headaches is that he might be away for the World Cup qualifier at the beginning of February, just before the Rangers game, which I think would be a substantial loss for Celtic if that's the case. But to take your point about Ange, I think maybe for any of us, when you're working with someone who knows you and knows your qualities and knows how to play to your strengths, I think I think there's a benefit there. I think and I think you've seen that this season. That it might be too simplistic to say that, but definitely there's an understanding there, and it's been shown. Just it's manifested itself in the way in which he's played. I think he looks very settled. I think he looks very comfortable. I think he looks like a player quite content within his role, and I think he's revelled in the job he's been asked to do so far this season.
Another player that Andrew here has mentioned that seems to be having a wee bit of a renaissance near Bitton, captained the team yesterday, scored a great goal, and generally since being restored to defensive midfield, the base of midfield position that he was naturally inhabiting, he seems to be having a new lease of life as well.
Well, I think when you go back to the start of the manager's reign, I think that first competitive game against Midtjylland when he was red carded and it was so costly, I think he's recovered from that. I think there were questions over whether or not he would have an opportunity to do so. I think he has. I think again he's shown through performances of late, and I'll exclude Wednesday night's game in Paisley, but I think he's shown with some performances a maturity. He looks like one of the senior members of the squad. I think he's played where he's been asked to play. He's got on with it whatever role he's been given, and I think he's probably done himself no harm at all with the kind of attitude that you've seen really over the last few months in terms of just being prepared to do a job for the team. I thought he played well at Hampden when he came on. I thought he played well in the cup final against Hibs when he came on, and I thought the goal yesterday was very important, just given the timing of when it came, because it closed the game off for Celtic. I think it might have been a more jittery finale to it without it. I think it just restored that 2-goal cushion, and you knew then that the game was pretty much done.
Now, it would have been easy with the shape change to maybe assume that Bitton would be dropping back, and if it was going to be a back three, he would maybe be a natural choice to come in with his passing. But although the lineup, when Celtic released it, implied it was going to be the usual formation with Stephen Welsh at right back, where, by the way, he played on loan at Morton, and I'm not sure he actually came out of that loan spell with any great plaudits. But it looked as if it was going to be that in practice. Well, Stephen Welsh did spend a lot of time in that area. It was essentially a back three. Now, one, were you shocked about that? And two, I'll tell you in a minute why I wasn't necessarily that shocked that he used a back three, but I think most people maybe were. But I suppose the key question is, were you shocked by it, and did you think it worked? More to the point.
Well, I don't say I wouldn't go so far as to say I was shocked. I had anticipated a back four. I think the way Celtic play, even with a back four, is that you have two attacking fullbacks anyway. I mean, you know, all the way he plays with inverted fullback roles and how much they commit to going forward anyway when Celtic are in possession of the ball. So I wasn't hugely taken aback by a back three, other than the fact that it's been used so rarely. In fact, I think that'd be the first time this season that it's been used. But I think it showed a willingness to change in terms of setup, dependent on the personnel and players available, which I think is a good thing. I think it just shows an ability to think differently when you know you've got so many players out. And what you would have to say is it worked, because they came away with 3 points, which is the ultimate aim, is to go and to win the game. I'm not sure when everyone is fit and available if you'll see that system used too often. I think his favoured way of setting up, but I think it's just it's another way to play that is there, and you can use it and use the strengths of the players that you have.
Well, I didn't necessarily expect it yesterday, but I did think at some point, maybe this season or even next season, he would use a back three, because he used one with Australia. And he actually used it plenty with Australia. It was pretty controversial back then as well, from what the reading that I've done about it. But he has used it. It was never necessarily a marriage to the 4-3-3 as much as the principles of the high press and the attacking philosophy that he had, because he switched to a 4-4-2 diamond before as well with Australia. Like, the evidence is there that it does amend the shape, just not the principles, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
So although I didn't necessarily expect it to be yesterday, especially with the way that the lineup was presented, I did think it was going to be Welsh at right back. I'm not altogether shocked that he did eventually use a back three. Maybe he's used it quicker than what I expected. But with the personnel issues and injuries, I think it definitely all fed into why he's used it at this stage. But I'm not overly surprised. I felt at some stage he might. But I think the key is it worked. It worked to get a 3-1 win. It worked with makeshift personnel. And ultimately, it worked to keep the same gap at the top of the league, which was the be-all and end-all from yesterday.
Yeah, without doubt. I think, I think the position that Celtic are in just now, and we spoke about it when it was 4 points, is that it becomes very, very difficult to come back when you slip. I think now you can't really afford to drop any points at all. I think every league game now is about getting over the line, making sure you get 3 points. I think everyone wants performances to go alongside that, but I think given the injury problems, I think it's just been about hanging on. I think now is the time to restructure, to rebuild, to maybe think about getting players back in. Christopher Julian has been out for a full calendar year now. I think when he is fit and available to come back in, I think he definitely adds some solidity to that back line. I think he could be a big player in the latter half of the campaign if he's up to speed and if he's fully fit. I think definitely there'll be reinforcements come in now in January when the window opens in the next few days. And I think Celtic, as the season now goes deeper, will be stronger as they go on. And I think there is scope to bring it back. I don't think it's over and done with yet. But what you would say is that there is just no margin for error at the minute.
Well, that leads me on to the next part. I mean, it is now the winter break, as I said at the top of the show, and this leaves Celtic 6 points back in the title race, but with the benefit of this January window on the horizon, and potentially, hopefully, you would think a necessity, reinforcements in ahead of the resumption. Now, we know that Ange yesterday reiterated that his own perspective for wanting an early winter break was due to the impact that the new restrictions have on fans. We've spoke about that last week when the decisions were in the offing. But overall, do you think that the timing of the break now comes at arguably at a better time for Celtic than it otherwise perhaps would have? And more crucially, can they make it work to their benefit in the title race?
Yeah, I think, well, the obvious point there is about getting players back. Kyogo's been limping through recent games, playing the League Cup, playing the Premier Sports Cup final, and then being out for the St Mirren game, coming back in and then having to go off. I think what the break now does is give these guys a proper chance to recuperate and recover. Same with the guys who have tested positive for COVID. I think had the games gone ahead, what a handicap it would have been at being asked to play against Rangers on the second without maybe Callum McGregor, without Joe Hart, without James Forrest. I think it would have further complicated things for Celtic. So in that aspect, without doubt, they're better off now with players able to recover and come back fit. On the other hand, I think the timing of the Rangers game might not be great either if you think that Rogic and Kyogo could be away. Two players that we've spoke in depth there about Rogic, and I think everyone knows what Kyogo brings. So you're losing two of your most prominent players for it. However, again, I do agree too. I think playing games behind closed doors or with very little fans is just a soulless experience. I think it's such a different game entirely. I was at Tynecastle yesterday for work. I was at the Hearts and Ross County game, and there's no energy in the stadium at all. I think Hearts could have had that game out of sight by half time, and you feel the lull, you feel the lack of energy from the crowd, which I think probably allowed Ross County to come back into it. And I think it's just such a different experience to be at games without a crowd. And I think for big games and for the derby game, I think you want it. I think I would take his point. I think you really want to showcase these games as much as you can.
I mentioned last week when we were talking about our preferences for whether the break should be taken forward or not. I did point out that there is every chance in the criticism of pulling it forward that you might just be kicking the can down the road and stuff. I do get it. I get the point of that. But my point was always at least give yourself a fighting chance of having them in rather than resigning yourself right away to it's not happening. That kind of thing. So it very well might be that we're sitting here by the time that the derby does roll around and it's going to be 500 fans or it's going to be no fans, that kind of thing. But if it is that, then it's one of those things, and I'm sure Ange Postecoglou would say himself, you just need to deal with it. At least you gave yourself a fighting chance by pushing the taking the break forward and kind of giving at least the option of fans returning by the time that these matches roll around.
Yeah, I agree. And the thing is, this is probably the maximum the break can go to now, because what you're going to come back to is very similar to what you've just gone through in December. You're going to come back to a very, very intense fixture list. You're going to come back to midweek games. You're going to be playing Saturday, Sunday, Wednesday for the next few months. It's going to be a fairly hectic structure. So I don't think there is scope to push it further down, but I think you've given yourself the very best chance. You've taken what break you can. I think it was sensible to do so. I think I said that because everyone wants fans in. It's such a different experience. It's not the same game without it, I don't think. So all you can do is give yourself a fighting chance and hope that the wave is on a downward curve over the next 2 to 3 weeks, that restrictions might be easing rather than getting tighter.
Yep. Right, okay, I think that'll do us for today. Thanks for your time, Alison, and for your comments, guys. Hope you all had a good Christmas. Remember, if you're watching on YouTube, to hit that subscribe button to get a notification when we go live, because, well, it's a winter break for the teams on the pitch. We'll still be here for your regular Celtic Fix off the pitch. So thanks again for watching.